For 10 years I locked the workshop doors at dusk, and for 10 years, nothing on the far side of that lock had ever been my business. Harrow's Reach was the kind of frontier town that only existed because the road needed a place to stop, and I was the kind of man who only existed because the town needed someone who could fix a hydraulic press without asking questions about where it came from. I fixed things. That was the whole shape of my life, and I liked the shape fine. Then one night, in the deep cold before the first snow, I heard something scraping against the loading door, low and patient, like it had already tried every other door on the street, and given up expecting better from this one. I opened it with a wrench still in my hand, more out of habit than caution, and found her crouched in the lee of the wall, small, gray-skinned, with faint pale threads running under her skin like wire beneath insulation, lit so dim you'd miss them if you weren't looking. Her clothes were workshop rags, someone else's cut down badly. She didn't flinch when the light hit her. She just watched me with the calm, assessing patience of something that had learned not to expect kindness and had stopped being surprised by its absence. I didn't ask where she'd come from. Frontier towns are full of children nobody claims, refugees off broken transports, kids traded down the line until the line runs out. I gave her the corner by the stove, an old blanket, and the last of the bread I'd been saving for morning, and she ate like she wasn't sure the offer would still stand by the second bite. She didn't talk, not that first night, not the second. I didn't push her. I named her Ostra, after nothing in particular. It was just a name that felt like it belonged to somebody quiet and durable, and she answered to it easily enough, like she'd decided the name suited her too. The first week, she wouldn't sleep unless she could see the door. The second week, she started following me around the shop at a careful distance, watching my hands, the way an apprentice watches a trade she means to learn, without asking permission first. I gave her small jobs, sorting bolts by size, holding a lamp steady, coiling cable, not because I needed the help, but because idle hands on a frightened kid are worse than busy ones. She took to it fast, faster than most grown men I'd trained. By the third week she was correcting my measurements before I'd finished taking them, and I'd started talking to her the way you talk to someone who understands more than they can answer back, which, it turned out, she did. I found out what she was 3 weeks later, and I found out the hard way. The support strut over the number 2 lathe let go on a Tuesday afternoon. Old bolt, worse weld, my own fault for putting off the inspection, and 1,100 pounds of housing dropped straight toward where I was bent over the workbench with my back to it. I heard the crack before I understood what it meant. I didn't have time to move. Ostra did. She came off the stool she'd been sitting on and got both hands under the falling edge of that housing like she was catching a dropped tool, not a half-ton of steel, and she held it. Not for long, maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds is a long time to stand underneath something that should have flattened you both. And when I got clear, and she let it drop the rest of the way, it hit the concrete hard enough to crack the slab. She looked at her own hands afterward like they belonged to someone else. I didn't make a show of it. I didn't call it a miracle, or ask her 12 questions she had no words to answer yet. I just said, "Well, good thing you were standing there," and went back to work with my hands shaking where she couldn't see them, because some part of me understood already that a discovery like that doesn't stay quiet in a town like Harrow's Reach, and quiet was the only thing keeping her safe. I was right to worry. It took less than a month. The broker came through on the supply run, a soft-spoken man named Ansel Vray, who bought scrap metal as a cover for buying other things, and somewhere between the depot and my workshop door, he'd heard the story the way stories travel in small places, thinned out, exaggerated, and aimed at exactly the wrong ears. A child, strong-blooded, stronger than she should be for her size. He didn't use those words to my face. He talked about placement opportunities, and compensation for the trouble of raising her, and a labor contract upriver that would, he assured me, treat her very well. I've met men who were cruel and men who were cowards, and Vray was worse than either. He was reasonable. He smiled the whole time. He never once raised his voice, because he didn't need to. He had the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no by someone who meant it. I told him no. I meant it. He came back 2 nights later with 2 men who weren't there to buy scrap, and I already had Astra behind the workshop's back wall, in the crawl space under the parts shelving where I kept the spare hydraulic lines, with instructions to stay put no matter what she heard through the boards. I didn't dress it up as an adventure. I told her plainly, some men think what you can do makes you worth owning, and I am not going to let that happen while I am still standing. And she needed to trust me enough to stay hidden and let me be the one standing between them and that wall. She didn't answer. She just took my hand for a second, the way she did sometimes when she wanted to say something and didn't have the words yet, and let go, and went where I told her. What happened after that isn't a story I tell in detail, and I won't start now. I will say that a workshop is full of leverage and weight, and things built to move loads heavier than a man, and that Vray's 2 men came in expecting an old mechanic and a frightened child, and left considerably less confident than they arrived, and that Vray himself stood in my doorway afterward, with his smile finally gone and understood, without my needing to explain it twice, that whatever he thought he'd priced correctly on the way in, he'd priced wrong. He didn't come back a 3rd time. Neither did anyone sent in his place. Word travels in small towns, and the word this time was mine to set loose, and I made sure it traveled far enough. I checked on Astra the moment the yard was quiet again. She came out from under the shelving with sawdust in her hair, and her eyes wide but steady, and she looked past me at the mess in the yard, and then back at me, and reached up and touched the side of my face like she was checking I was still whole, still the same shape I'd been that morning. I'm here, I told her. You did exactly right, staying put. She nodded once, like she'd already decided that, and pressed her forehead briefly against my sleeve, the only kind of embrace she seemed to know how to give, and that was the whole conversation. Neither of us needed more than that. I filed the adoption papers the following spring, plain and unremarkable, the way most true things in a life like mine tend to be. No fanfare, no ceremony, no one from the Capitol watching over my shoulder to make sure I did it right. Just a clerk's stamp and a signature, and a girl who was, from that day forward, legally and permanently mine to keep, in a town that had already quietly decided the same thing months before the paperwork caught up. She works the shop with me now. Small hands, steady work, strength she's learned to measure out carefully instead of spend all at once. She's the one who lifts what the hoist can't reach, and the one who knows, better than I ever taught her, exactly how much of herself to hold back so nothing under her hands gets broken that wasn't meant to be. I gave her her own set of tools the day she turned old enough to want them, a worn spanner that had been my father's, and she keeps it on her belt like other kids keep a favorite toy. Customers who don't know her story sometimes underestimate her, reach past her for the heavier end of a load, or ask me, right in front of her, if she's strong enough to be trusted with the good machinery. I let her answer that one herself, now. She usually does, quietly, by lifting the thing they doubted she could, setting it down exactly where it needs to go, and returning to her work without another word. Vray's name still comes up sometimes, second-hand, from traders passing through, working smaller towns further out now, more careful about which children he asks after. I don't go looking for him. I don't need to. He learned what he needed to learn about Harrow's reach, and some lessons only need teaching once. For 10 years before her, I locked the workshop at dusk, and never thought twice about what might be waiting on the other side of that door. I still lock it every night, but now I do it with her already inside, safe, and that's the only kind of locking a door like mine was ever really built for.